There are 3 things that I got wrong about Roki Sasaki when I made a video breakdown on his pitch mix that I think are necessary to review as we inch closer to his decision window between January 15th and the 23rd. The first thing I got wrong relates to a small data error. Back in my first video, I was in search of a reason for Sasaki's loss of velocity because the concept that he was just preserving his arm didn't really make much sense to me. Given that all the body movement and mechanical data we can get on the public side boils down to release point and extension, that's really all I had to work off. When we look at Sasaki's fastball shape in NPB from 2023 to 2024, we see his extension increased and his release point stayed the same alongside a notable change in his fastball shape. My assumption at the time was that this extension was important because it implied Sasaki raised his arm between 2023 and 2024. The idea being that if your extension increases but your release height is the same, the only way for you to do that, given that you're further down a sloped mound, is to kick up your arm to get to that prior release height. But what I now understand, and this is thanks to an individual in a major league organization that reached out and said that he thought the data I was using from the prior video was more raw data, and that a lot of major league organizations actually make small adjustments because of venue, environment, ball, etc., how things are measured internationally. And they thought he was more like a 6.4-ish extender instead of the 7 feet that I had. So this is a good correction, it's important, but how much does it really matter? While I was in fact wrong here, and I'm happy to admit that, I'm not entirely sure 6 inches of extension invalidates the take I had in that video, which was Sasaki's fastball shape, despite being 97 miles per hour, underperformed last year in MPB. Which I think is a slight concern given that we have to expect some more regression in fastball shape when we compare his data with an MPB ball, which is smaller and tackier, to the major league ball he will eventually use. Correcting this fastball is one of the main things that any organization has to be focused on from a development standpoint if they were to acquire him. After talking to a few organizations about their evaluations on Sasaki, the general consensus seems to be that he started cutting everything in 2024 compared to 2023. The way you would ID this is by looking at a pitch plot. For a right-handed pitcher, cutting the ball means things are moving generally down and to the left more. And we generally see that with Sasaki. I'm mocking up pitch plots here, but Sasaki in 2023 was more over here. And then in 2024, we see everything kind of shift down and to the left. This caused the fastball regression. It also caused some lengthening of the slider, but too much of a velocity loss for that to be a better pitch. And then you see this wacky splitter thing that he created, which I mentioned in the prior video. That was probably the only benefit. So while my extension number was incorrect, it led to some pretty good conversations on whether an organization might try to correct this cutting and whether that would get him back to the fastball shape that he flashed in 2023 WBC that I think everybody in baseball kind of fell in love with. And the reason that fastball is so important to get back on track, which I'll emphasize again, is that he doesn't really have much else in his mix, which brings me to the second thing I got wrong with Sasaki. He's more of a project from a repertoire standpoint than I think I initially suggested. I think a big part of teams' pitches to Sasaki, pun intended, is that they're trying to sell him on what they do as an organization from a pitch development standpoint. From my perspective, that particular section of any team's pitch carries more weight than it did for guys like Shota Imanaga or Yoshinobu Yamamoto. That's because of the money involved with those other two guys, but also the track record each of those two pitchers had before coming stateside that Sasaki I don't think necessarily has. I emphasized it in my last video and I'll emphasize it again, but Sasaki doesn't have a great natural ability to spin the baseball or a high spin capacity, as some organizations might call it. Now, spin rate was a really popular topic when Savant first released all of its advanced pitch information, and then when everyone's hands were covered in spider tack and we had this sticky substance revolution, it was really popular again. But I think of it as just the capacity to create movement. The average four-seam fastball spin rate in MLB in 2024 was around 2,300 RPM at 94 miles per hour. Sliders are somewhere around here at 85 to 86 miles per hour. In comparison, Sasaki over an MPB with a smaller, tackier ball that generally spins more was around 2,100 RPM at 97 miles per hour on his fastball and below 2,000 RPM on his slider. Both of these are not great numbers and would rank in the bottom 10% or so of MLB in terms of velocity adjusted spin rate. Now, if you don't have high spin rates like Sasaki, you kind of have to get creative to make shapes that stuff models will like. This is where a guy like Logan Gilbert from the Mariners comes in. I think he's one of the more successful low spin pitchers in Major League Baseball. I don't think he's a one-to-one comp for Sasaki. Gilbert is a huge guy with massive extension down the mound and some funky body metrics that I think really help him out. I'm going to stick to more of like a Hunter Green type with more splitter for a guy like Roki Sasaki, but that's kind of besides the point. With Gilbert, what I want to point out that I think is relevant to Sasaki is how much Gilbert's mix has developed since he came into the league in 2021. Take his pitch plot in 2021 on the left and compare it to 2024, and we see a lot of changes. Sure, he had a lower arm slap, but he added a splitter, new cutter, new slider shape, no more curveball. He added a sweeper. I think this is the mold for an organization to take with Sasaki. Death by numbers, encourage a variety of pitch types and see what sticks. Almost all of this with the vision of getting his approach versus right-handed hitters more dialed in. This doesn't need to be in his first year. It can be progressive, as we saw with Yoshinobu Yamamoto and the Dodgers. But if we look back in 3 to 4 years, I expect Sasaki's mix to be pretty deep. And again, the advantage he has is that he throws everything hard. I'd be curious to see if he can get to this cutter shape that Gilbert is throwing. I call it the Yankee cutter shape. There's a video on it that I'll link to above. Michael Grove and Gavin Stone are both pitchers in the Dodgers org who started throwing it this season. It's essentially a cutter with a ton of lift, especially effective versus left-handed hitters, and most notably, it's separated a lot from these more gyro sliders down here, such that there's minimal chance of blurring between the two pitches. I'd also encourage him to shorten up his slider and rip the heck out of it, hopefully push it into the 91 to 92 mile per hour, get as much drop on it as you can. He's thrown an occasional curveball. I would definitely take that in 0-0 counts, even if the shape is subpar because of his spin capacity. And give me a sinker here as well. Even if he's a higher efficiency guy, if you get him back to that higher efficiency two-plane fastball, he could still perhaps use a sinker to jam righties inside, a la Jeff Hoffman, who's probably trying to convert to a starter did this most recent season. The splitter is an objectively insane pitch for Sasaki. I'm not trying to take away from that. I love that thing. It's going to be elite in an MLB, but if we want excellence, which his agent Joe Wolf has suggested multiple times, then his mix has to widen a lot. The last thing I got wrong is that I didn't really consider location in the Sasaki puzzle because I didn't think I had any information on it. But thankfully, the great Yaku Cosmopolitan on X, I hope I'm saying that correctly, posted a screenshot of Sasaki's location maps versus left-handed hitters and right-handed hitters. And this allows us to see even more adjustments and even some justification for some of the things I mentioned in the second thing I got wrong. The main thing to point out here is that he isn't pitching inside almost at all to either handedness of hitter. Let's focus on righties first. His fastball location I question because I'm not sure on his inherent level of command. The Dodgers are notorious for taking non-elite carry fastballs like this and dotting them on the outer third of the plate. I think to increase count leverage and help set up a line for their sliders to work off. The risk, however, is that a fastball's natural miss is in the direction of the pitch's movement, which in this case is up into the pitcher's arm side. So if you're trying to locate the pitch outer third, you're going to miss back into the zone and potentially give up damage. If Sasaki isn't working with good glove side command, or even if it's average, especially without a great slider shape to justify that pitch being on the outer third, I'm not totally surprised that he ran into low swing and miss on his fastball in 2024 over an MPB. The paths to correction here are something like A, give the fastball a reason to be on the outer third of the plate with a sharper slider, or B, if his pitch maintains some of the two-plane features it flashed in the MPB this most recent season, consider throwing it inside on occasion, which I think he can do based on what he does with his fastball to left-handed hitters, which is throw the pitch up and away, as you can see here. I don't mind this approach for his forcing fastball to left-handed hitters, but you can see that his slider is primarily used as a backdoor strike stealer, which is interesting. Although the pitch is minimally used and he's probably never going to overtake his splitter versus lefties, there's reason to believe, as I've hammered in this video, that throwing this pitch harder could necessitate him throwing it down and in, or maybe going back to that Yankee cutter I was talking about. The bias on the Yankee cutter is often to get up and inside, which again negates our problem here of him not pitching inside to either handedness of hitter. So those are the three things I got wrong with Roki Sasaki. His extension number needed to be corrected. The repertoire expansion I really had to emphasize a bit more. And then getting some location data allowed us to take a look at some of the pitch design ideas I had and how they would stitch back into his actual approach versus specific handedness of hitter. The last thing I will mention is that despite the fact that maybe I'm partially critical on a guy like Sasaki, he's a massive value to any organization he goes to because you get 6 years of control, 3 of them at the league minimum, and then you could pay him whatever the international signing bonus becomes, which is going to be under $5 million. Maybe it's more in the 2 to 4 window. We'll eventually see on that. He is a huge value, especially for an organization that doesn't necessarily want to spend money in free agency. This is your chip to put down and tell your fan base that you got a massive upside piece that you're going to develop over the next 6 years and you didn't have to pay a lot for it. That's why I think his free agency case is so fascinating. And also why you could almost invalidate a lot of these critiques because he's a development project. This isn't, in my opinion, going to be a Yamamoto where he pops and dominates in his first year, or even like a Senga, who was a bit more volatile perhaps, but had the cachet of having just an unbelievable splitter. He made a ton of adjustments as well. Sasaki's really fun. It's going to take him some time, I think, to become an elite pitcher. There's some risk he becomes a reliever, and even then, he's a huge value, I think, for the price you're paying him. So I hope you enjoyed this second Sasaki video here. Some things that I needed to get off my chest. And again, I had to play the SEO algorithm here, and throw some Sasaki content out there before he eventually makes his decision. So as always, thanks for watching and take care.